Unwrap your first Christmas present this Saturday at 7 with the Cavs Championship Marathon. Fox Sports Ohio will replay Game 7 of the NBA Finals against Golden State. Cavaliers Live post-game show and the Cavs Championships Celebration Parade. It's our gift to you this holiday season, beginning Saturday at 7 on Fox Sports Ohio. Welcome back into Drennan Live here on Sportstime Ohio. Sadly, it is our last week of fantasy football talk, and joining us now, Ryan Fowler of foxsports.com. You can find everything you need to know on foxsports.com/fantasy. Also follow him at Fox Sports Fowler. We have loved all of your advice so far this season, and I'm not in the championship, so I guess I'll let everyone else have their questions to you today, and I won't bother you with all of mine. But we're going to start things off a little differently here, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to go through all the games that are coming up this weekend and kind of what stands out to you in each of those matchups. Good?
Sounds great.
All right, starting off December 22nd, which is Thursday, the Eagles hosting the Giants.
Yeah, you got to love short week games when you're going into the Fantasy Football Championship. This is probably my least favorite Thursday night game of the season, being that there is so much on the line. Plus, you have some teams that have some fantasy-relevant players. But the big thing that's going to come out of this game, will the good Eli Manning or the bad Eli Manning show up? He scored 22 fantasy points in Week 15. That got me over the edge in one of my leagues, but we need a little bit more. And the first time he faced the Eagles, now granted this was at home, this game will be on the road, he lit up the Eagles. And that pass defense of the Eagles can get chewed up. I expect big things from Eli Manning. 25-plus fantasy football points. Eli Manning can be started in Week 16.
All right, looking at the Bills coming off that win over our Cleveland Browns here. And the Dolphins played on Saturday, so Christmas Eve there. Dolphins at Bills.
Jay Ajayi. I know that name. I don't know if I pronounced it right all year, but I can tell you this. Ajayi had a monster game against Buffalo the first time around. 214 yards. You might remember earlier on this season, Jay really took the reins. Arian Foster was retiring. The Dolphins, they were kind of flipping the switch to how good they have been the rest of the way. 214 yards against Buffalo the first time around. Jay has not played well the last 2 weeks for fantasy owners. You got to plug him in there. Big things out of Jay. And again, when you look at what LaShawn McCoy's done the last few weeks, you're going to line him up too. But I think this is going to be a running back-centric game.
All right, Falcons on the road, taking on the Panthers.
Yeah, you know, the Falcons are interesting because Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman are coexisting, but you know that this game comes down to whether or not Julio Jones will be able to play, right? I mean, he's had the turf toe injury for a few weeks now, and if he plays, what does that do to Taylor Gabriel, the former Cleveland Brown? Taylor Gabriel has had a nice stretch over the last month and a half. I streamed him in there in Week 15. It paid off, but that was against the 49ers. I think Carolina played above and beyond what anybody expected on Monday night against Washington. I think they come down to earth a little bit more. Look for Taylor Gabriel as a flex option if Julio Jones can't go.
Speaking of our Cleveland Browns, will they give us a Christmas gift and maybe the first win of the season against the Chargers? What are you looking at in that one?
Well, it's going to come back to the San Diego running back game. We got to see if Melvin Gordon's going to be able to play. It doesn't look like he will. So Kenneth Farrow, he had 2 fumbles in Week 15 against the Raiders. Kenneth Farrow is a rookie that it showed a little bit of promise in Week 14, and then people started him, and he really didn't do much against the Raiders, which was unfortunate. But, again, you know that rush defense of the Browns. You can exploit it in fantasy football. The problem with Farrow is Ronnie Hillman, the veteran running back, is there in San Diego. Will he cut into those touches because of those 2 fumbles, or will they see what they have in Farrow and put him up against Cleveland? I think Farrow can still squeeze in there as an RB2.
All right, Bears, Redskins will be at Soldier Field.
That's going to be a great one. I think there could be, based on if the weather's okay, because it was quite chilly there in the Packers-Bears game. But this is where Matt Barkley kind of steps up again. I think Washington, you could pass against them. I know Josh Norman is lurking, but look at what Cam Newton was able to do to him. I think Deontay Thompson's interesting, Cameron Meredith, Josh Bellamy. Some of these unknown wide receivers in the Bears offense have been quite fascinating and fantasy relevant for 2 to 3 weeks now. The other fun stat of the year, I think this might be one of my favorite stats. Since Week 8, Jordan Howard, the running back of the Bears, has averaged more than 100 rushing yards per game. Nobody's talking about Jordan Howard.
Yeah, he helped someone beat me in this past week. So thank you, Jordan Howard. And someone else, Tom Brady, not doing so hot last week. Patriots will play host to the Jets.
Yeah, and this comes back to a couple things. One, on New England's side, Dion Lewis finally had his breakout game that everybody had hoped would come about 3 weeks ago. I really thought LeGarrette Blount was going to have the big game for the Denver Broncos matchup, and Dion Lewis comes out of there looking great. I think that's where you have to be careful. Do not fall in love with Dion Lewis going up against the New York Jets. I think that is a little bit of a scary situation. As for the Jets, though, I think Robbie Anderson is the story of the moment. Robbie Anderson has had 3 consecutive big games, but we have to see if Bryce Petty is healthy enough. If anybody saw that sack that he took with Ndamukong Suh and Cameron Wake, he had to leave that game. We're in wait-and-see mode if he can play in Week 16. But if he can, Robbie Anderson, he's a wide receiver 2/3. He's definitely had some big games over the last few weeks.
Jacksonville firing their coach. They will play host to the Titans this week.
Great storyline here. So Tennessee, they've really tried, and they've really come out of nowhere to really make a push there in the AFC South. DeMarco Murray, consistent as they come in fantasy football. But Derrick Henry, yes, the former Alabama running back, over the last few weeks has been able to carve out his own role, even though DeMarco Murray's getting 15 to 25 touches per game. Derrick Henry has scored a touchdown in 4 out of his last 5 games that he has played in. I think Derrick Henry could be a flex play in standard scoring leagues where you don't count the points per reception, because last time he played Jacksonville, he had a big game, and DeMarco played in that. So they're finding ways to get both running backs involved. I like Derrick Henry.
All right, Minnesota Vikings on the road taking on the Packers.
Yeah, what about Minnesota against that Indy game last? That was ugly. I really thought Minnesota was going to have an opportunity. Not so much Adrian Peterson's return to go out there and do a lot of work, but Stephon Diggs and maybe get that passing game going. But that one really fell flat. I think the storyline out of this game, though, is what will Ty Montgomery do for an encore? 30-plus fantasy points against the Bears in Week 15. I don't think that's realistic in this game, because when Ty Montgomery came on the fantasy football radar earlier this year, he was also catching passes. He hasn't done that the last 2 weeks in the same way that he did earlier this season. It's all been carrying the football. And I think against Minnesota, that's a little shaky. And, Frank Gore rushed for over 100 yards for the Colts last week against the Vikings. He needed 26 carries to do it. I don't think Ty Montgomery is going to get that many touches. So if you own Ty Montgomery, he's starting for you, but just keep those expectations a little lower. I'm thinking between 15 and 20 fantasy points, and you're living life good.
Speaking of Frank Gore and the Colts, they will be on the road taking on the Raiders.
Yeah, the one thing about this team, the Raiders, again, they're rebooting their franchise. They've qualified for the playoffs. Derek Carr's playing hurt. And Derek Carr, I still think he's going to be somebody that I would rank within the top 12 quarterbacks, which means he's going to start. But he dislocated that pinky a few weeks ago, and he hasn't really been the same. Now, against the Colts, you can pass the ball a little bit. You could do some things with Latavius Murray in the running game. But what has really hurt owners is over the last month, Derek Carr's injured finger has negatively impacted Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has not had a monster fantasy game in over a month. And now when I look at my rankings going into this game, I think Cooper's going to fall down that board a little bit more. Not to say that he's outside the top 24, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, but Amari Cooper, a lot of people expected bigger things of him this year. And I think a little bit of that growth was stunted when Derek Carr dislocated that pinky. Just keep tabs on that heading into that matchup.
All right, up next, we'll look at the Saints. They are at home hosting the Buccaneers.
Yeah, second time in 3 weeks these two teams play, and Tampa Bay really muted Drew Brees 2 weeks ago, but we saw what Drew Brees just did in the desert as he carved up Arizona for 4 quarters, and I believe in your league he scored 70-plus fantasy points.
Yep, he did.
That's
77.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment. Now, I think that at home, a New Orleans home game is a great thing for Drew Brees and Brandon Cooks owners, but as you learned, the RBBC, the running back by committee of the New Orleans Saints, Tim Hightower, Mark Ingram, it's a tough nut to crack because Mark Ingram's getting enough touches to warrant the start. What's happening and what has turned Mark Ingram into a tantrum on the sideline is Tim Hightower is sometimes finishing those drives and getting those goal line carries. That's enough to drive a sane person mad. And I think they're using both of those running backs similarly as Tennessee is using DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry. Hightower in standard scoring leagues can be flexed, but I think in PPR leagues, his value is diminished a little bit just because he's not getting enough touches to warrant the start.
All right, the Cardinals are on the road taking on the Seahawks.
Yeah, this is a dangerous game for Larry Fitzgerald owners. I think you bench Larry Fitzgerald in this game, and I'll tell you why. He hasn't scored a touchdown since early October. And I know at any given moment Larry Fitzgerald can have a nice game, but going to Seattle in late December, that just doesn't line up as a great matchup. Plus, The thing is, Carson Palmer on the road this year has been awful. The pass rush of the Seahawks and that defense is not as good as it was 3 years ago, but it's still solid enough to make Carson Palmer's life hell. I think you bench Larry Fitzgerald in the championship. Really weird to say, but I think that's probably the best bet.
All right, 49ers facing off with the Rams.
What an ugly game, right? But here's the thing. Todd Gurley owners have waited all season for a breakout game. If there's ever going to be a breakout game for Todd Gurley, it's got to come against the 49ers rush defense. They can't stop anybody. Devonta Freeman had a monster game. Every running back has had a monster game against the 49ers this year. Plus, we have to see Jared Goff got injured by Richard Sherman in Week 15, so there might be a little bit of a quarterback change. Sean Mannion might get the start, who was drafted a few years ago for the Rams. But I think this is the game for Gurley. You can't not start him against the 49ers rush defense. They're that bad. They're allowing 150-plus rush yards per game. Todd Gurley, he's got to flirt with 20 fantasy points in this game. If he doesn't, send me the hate mail.
Oh, you better watch out. Don't say that, you know.
It's all right. I understand how it goes.
Okay. So the last one we'll look at on Christmas Eve, Texans and Bengals facing off.
Yeah, and Tom Savage is the new quarterback for the Houston Texans as they've benched Brock Osweiler and that heavy contract. But the good thing for DeAndre Hopkins owners is this switch has been made because DeAndre Hopkins, as bad as his year has been, he's been getting it going over the last 3 weeks. Now, he's not scoring 20-plus fantasy points, but Tom Savage knows to go to DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that's something different than when Brock Osweiler was there. So if there was anything to take away from this matchup, I really think it is DeAndre Hopkins can start, and you can feel good about it. The other thing is the Bengals, Jeremy Hill, causing many headaches. I don't think a lot of owners of Jeremy Hill have been quite happy this year with that production or lack thereof. I think they thought they'd get a little bit more, especially when Gio Bernard went on IR. But the big storyline in this one, look out for DeAndre Hopkins to have one of his best games.
All right, looking at Christmas Day now in an AFC North matchup, the Ravens and the Steelers.
Yeah, and the Ravens, this is going to come up later in this segment, I know, but it's Terrence West and it's Kenneth Dixon, and that's one big headache. Because 2 weeks ago, it was Kenneth Dixon having a monster game, kind of a breakout game in the passing role of the Ravens offense. And then they go back to Terrence West last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. So we really don't know which way that dice is going to fall week to week, and that's going to cause a lot of headaches for owners heading into Week 16 because we don't know what we don't know. It looked like the trend was Kenneth Dixon was going to take over for Terrence West, and then West goes out and has a big game against the Eagles. That's where that begins and ends in that matchup.
All right, the second matchup, Christmas Day, Broncos at Chiefs.
Well, we know the Broncos can't really run the ball anymore. Justin Forsett, Devontae Booker, there's just not a lot going on there. Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, you flip a coin each week there. So let's go to Kansas City. Can they get anything out of Spencer Ware the rest of the way? Spencer Ware has really kind of just chugged along since he came back from injury earlier this year, and they need to get something out of him because right now you look at the running back rankings, and Spencer Ware finds himself inside the top 24 week to week, but he really hasn't provided top 24 production on a week-by-week consistent basis. I think that's one storyline to watch, and then week in and week out, Travis Kelce. Which Travis Kelce are they going to use? Because Andy Reid on any given week can give him 7 targets and he can catch 120 yards of receiving. And then the next week, 3 for 42. So Travis Kelce, one of those tight ends you have to start because he can break out. And again, looking at the other options, but they can really mute Travis Kelce real quick. And that's one frustrating thing of owning him this year.
And finally, the matchup we'll take a look at, the Monday night one, Lions and Cowboys.
Yeah, and it comes down to Dak Prescott, right? You know, Ezekiel Elliott, no question you're starting him. I think Dak Prescott's going to be an interesting start this week because you can pass against the Detroit Lions. Detroit, one of my favorite stats, allowing opposing quarterbacks to pass for 73%. I mean, that's beyond the league worst, is a 73% completion percentage for opposing quarterbacks against the Lions' pass defense. But Dak isn't going downfield a lot. He's checking down, and that completion percentage for his own good is nice and clean, but he's not taking a lot of shots downfield. Des Bryant's been kind of muted because of that. I'm a little nervous on starting Des. I think his fantasy point ceiling against the starting Dak, his fantasy point ceiling is 20 to 25. I just don't think because they don't go downfield enough and they have Zeke to really carry the rock so many times per game, I'm thinking Dak's fantasy point ceiling hovers in between 20 and 25, and that's about it.
All right, there you have it. All the matchups we take a look at. Ryan Fowler of FoxSports.com. Follow him at Fox Sports Fowler. We do have some fan questions from Facebook, and we will start with Joe DeCesar, and he says, which 3 receivers should I start? He gives you Amari Cooper, Taylor Gabriel, Michael Thomas, Brandon Marshall, or Mike Wallace.
You know, we talked about Cooper earlier in this segment, so go back to those notes because that definitely plays in. You know, I really like Mike Wallace. I like Taylor Gabriel if Julio sits. I think Mike Wallace is one of those guys where you look at what his ceiling can be and what he did against the Steelers earlier on this year. Now, Steve Smith was hurt in that game, but I think if you wanted to pump the brakes on Amari Cooper and say, maybe not this time because, again, the consistency just hasn't been there. Now, I'm going to say Amari Cooper is probably going to be ranked in the top 24. But if you're nervous because of that lack of consistency, I'm thinking Wallace, I'm thinking Gabriel. And Ashley, remind me who the guy was after Gabriel that he listed.
Michael Thomas. Brandon
Michael
Marshall.
Thomas, definitely. No question. You know, him coming back from injury, going up against Tampa Bay, I really like him because, again, if you look at these rookie receivers, he hasn't really been heralded as that good of a rookie because Zeke's been so good and Dak's been so good. But Mike Thomas having a monster rookie year, definitely him.
All right, up next is Dustin Sharp. He would like you to pick one of these guys, please. Derek Carr, Big Ben, or Dak. Who do you think will put up the biggest fantasy numbers this weekend?
I love Roethlisberger at home, but he was muted a little bit from the Ravens defense, which is really good. And I think that could be a 25 fantasy point performance for Roethlisberger. Derek Carr, I go back to what I said about his pinky. I still think he can put up enough points against the Colts to warrant the start over Roethlisberger because the Ravens defense is that good. The wild card, as I just mentioned about that matchup with the Lions, is Dak. I think he's between 20 and 25 fantasy points. He's the safest one. I will say between Roethlisberger and Carr and then Dak, I really think Dak is the safest bet to get between 20 and 25 fantasy points because that defense of the Lions, 73%, they're allowing opposing quarterbacks to pass for. I think that's the way I'm kind of looking at it right now. Dak's the safest, but I think the highest fantasy point ceiling is Roethlisberger at home.
All right, Mike Eastman, he needs a running back to go with Zeke here. So I think you might get enough points from Zeke. But if you want to throw someone else in there, Ingram, Farrow, or Riddick?
Yeah, and Riddick's been injured. I'm not going to go that direction. I think Farrow is based on, okay, you got Ronnie Hillman lingering. We'll see if Melvin Gordon's inactive too. But I think that's a great matchup against the Browns. Ingram, as we know, is in a running back by committee with Hightower. Ingram's getting between 15 and 20 touches, so you're going to take the veteran. And the guaranteed production, I don't think you could say that it's not guaranteed because Ingram's going to go out there against the Buccaneers and he's going to get 15 to 20 touches. Farrow comes with some red flags, especially after the 2 fumbles last week. I think Ingram's the safest bet there.
All right, so Jim's going to play DraftKings and wants to know, do you think it's crazy to load up on all the players really who's going to play the Browns and the 49ers this week, or is it smart?
Well, I think Gurley's going to come out at a little bit of a discount, but I think a lot of people, when you play DFS, there's talk of fading the obvious. And I think a lot of people are going to play Gurley because the price tag is cheaper than what it was at the beginning of the year. So you have to take that into the strategy. Do you want the similar players that everybody's going after, or do you want to kind of mix and match some guys that you like? Like Robbie Anderson against the Patriots might not be the most obvious, but he's going to come with a cheaper price tag, and you can plug him in there because a lot of people are going to try and take advantage of that matchup with the Browns and the Chargers and then the 49ers and Rams. A lot of people are going to go that direction. So it also depends. Are you in a guaranteed prize pool or are you in a cash game? If you're in a guaranteed prize pool, you kind of want to mix it up a little bit more. So I would kind of find some different flavors around the league in Week 16 and not go with what everybody else is doing. Because then your points of difference aren't going to be that great and you're going to have trouble cracking that top list to get in the money.
All right. Brian would like to know, should he still play Tyreek Hill against Denver?
Tyreek Hill, one of my favorite guys in the league right now and probably one of the biggest head scratchers because his usage is varying week to week. And the reason he brings up Tyreek Hill is because his last game against Denver was when he had a special teams touchdown, rushing touchdown, and receiving touchdown. I don't think that happens again. I wouldn't be shocked if Denver kicked away from him in the special teams and had somebody spying him on defense when he's in the passing and receiving game. I think the 32 fantasy points that he scored the first time around comes back down to earth, and we settle in around 10 to 15 because that's what he's been averaging over the last few weeks.
Okay, you mentioned this, but Jeff would like to know, he's saying he has both Kenneth Dixon and Terrence West, so who's a better start?
I still think it's Kenneth Dixon. Terrence West goes out there and he chews up the Eagles in that defense in Week 15. But I really think in PPR leagues and points per reception leagues, Kenneth Dixon is the future of that team. And maybe it is still going to be a running back by committee in 2017. But Kenneth Dixon has shown a lot in that passing game. I think the reason he got yanked a little bit in Week 15, he missed a block on third down. And if there's anything that gets a young running back in the doghouse, it's missing in pass protection. So that might have been why his role was reduced in a close game with the Eagles. But I really think it's Dixon. I think Terrence West, when he does that, it's always going to raise an eyebrow or two because there's just been this ebb and flow between the two of them. And here's the thing. I try and avoid that situation altogether. I know it's late in the season, but that's why you have depth on your running back bench and that there are a few guys on the waiver wire, I would think.
All right, we always talk about the Patriots, and we never know what their game plan is going to be, of course. Jeff would like to know if you think he should play Edelman or Malcolm Mitchell.
Well, I think it's Edelman. I think when you look at the Jets' pass defense, it's bad. And it's so bad that Edelman, even though he's going to be the one that is going to be blanketed the most, I really think he can have a big game. Malcolm Mitchell, he's still going to be growing as a wide receiver, but I think in this matchup, I think Edelman could see a good amount of targets and definitely have a breakout game because Darrelle Revis, their top cornerback, I mean, he's washed up. It's not any. He used to be one of the best. I mean, we know what Darrelle Revis was in the past. He's just not that guy anymore. So I think Edelman is the safer of the two. Now, higher ceiling, and again, if it's standard scoring, maybe I go Malcolm Mitchell because in standard scoring, you're not counting all those receptions that Edelman's going to get, and you're just looking for that touchdown, basically. Mitchell has a little bit more value, but I really like Edelman in this matchup. I think Tom Brady's going to go out there and definitely make a statement against the Jets this late in the season.
All right, good. I'd like to hear that. That's for sure. Ryan wants to know if Carson Palmer is a must-start or should he go with Eli?
I like Eli. I think Carson on the road at Seattle, that's asking for trouble. I really think Carson Palmer had a nice game against the Saints. A lot of quarterbacks have nice games against the Saints, and he was at home. You put him up there in Seattle. I mean, look at some of his road games this year and look at some of the stats that Carson's put up on the road. It's been pretty rough. Plus, again, he's not getting a lot from his receivers right now. Again, taking the Saints game out of the equation. I think Eli against the Eagles is the safer of the two bets.
All right, I'm going to save the best for last, I guess. Our producer extraordinaire here, Gene Winters, is in the championship game in our league. So he would like to know he needs to start 2 at wide receiver or 3 if he gets rid of Spencer Ware. So he gives you these options: Fitzgerald, Garcon, Britt, Shepard, Benjamin, Meredith.
I think those are all the same receivers in my rankings. I think they're actually ranked 26 through 32 or whatever they are. Here's the thing. Britt against San Francisco. I like it. I really think that you can go that direction. I wouldn't get rid of Spencer Ware in this situation. I think you have a lot of the same caliber wide receivers. And I mentioned what with Fitz earlier. I don't think you can start him. So Britt's interesting. Cameron Meredith is definitely interesting against Washington. And then it kind of becomes a crapshoot. I think you got Meredith and Britt and Spencer Ware, and then you look at the other names on that list, and they're all kind of, and I told you this, Ashley, too. It's like when you talk about Dontrell Inman and Tyrell Williams of the San Diego Chargers, you're kind of talking about the same wide receiver, and then Phillip Rivers just picks on any given week who's going to get the most targets. I think you roll the dice with Britt against, and again, it also depends on which quarterback the Rams have, but I really like Cameron Meredith against the Redskins. I like Spencer Ware enough against the Broncos this late in the season, and Fitz makes me really nervous at Seattle.
Actually, I lied. I'm going to ask you this because since the Chargers play the Browns, does that change things? Do you just go, as we said, Chargers heavy then?
Well, I mean, the narrative street says Travis Benjamin's going to have a big game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he comes back and has a big game. It wouldn't shock me because he scored last week. I really think that the way that they're using the passing game right now, Gates is less involved, which I don't understand why, because he was on fire there for all of November, unless he's playing hurt and we haven't seen any headlines, because Hunter Henry has definitely been more involved. But Tyrell Williams had to leave Week 15 for a few minutes because he was under concussion protocol, and he passed the test and came back in and did nothing. Dontrell Inman has had a nice stretch, but it hasn't been consistent by any means. I really think Travis Benjamin would have the biggest week this week going against his former team.
Thank you so much, Ryan Fowler of FoxSports.com, for all of your great advice this season. We really enjoyed having you. And I know it's not just football, though. You guys have all the fantasy sports covered, so let the fans know where they can go and what you guys cover to get the best advice from you guys.
Yeah, in a couple weeks, we'll be flipping the page over to fantasy baseball. So we'll have draft content for fantasy baseball starting up around mid-January, and then fantasy draft season around the time pitchers and catchers report. So the calendar just flips over to baseball. But it's been great working with Sportstime Ohio, Fox Sports Ohio up there in Cleveland, and appreciate you having me on each and every week.
Of course, thanks so much. Happy holidays to you and your family, of course. And again, thanks for all the great advice, especially for me, because it really helped me through this fantasy football season. Have a good one, Ryan. Thanks. Keep it right here, guys, on Sportstime Ohio. We'll be back in just a minute to wrap things up right here on Drennan Live.